So today we have my guest was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. Jamond Foree has spent his career working to improve the cognitive, physical, and social emotional outcomes for young people from cradle to career. He currently serves as Community Mobilization Manager for GLSEN, the leading national education organization focused on ensuring safe schools for all students, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity expression. Previously, Jamond provided professional development and capacity building support to the Ohio Department of Education 21st CCLC network. Additionally, he has served as Youth Development Education Program Director for the YMCA Greater Cincinnati, Senior Manager for Community Strategies at Stride Partnerships, and as Teacher Advisor for the YMCA of the USA. As a trainer and skilled facilitator, Germaine has worked all across the country helping organizations, school district, and municipality buildings capacity while developing strategies to ensure diversity, inclusion, and equity. In addition, Germaine is a multidisciplinary artist, having worked professionally as a costume designer, actor, and writer. When he's not trying to save the world, he's busy working his most important job as dad. So please welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline, Mr. Jamond Foree. Welcome, brother.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, we are excited to have you with all the things that you are here doing. And again, most importantly, being a dad. So shout out to you for coming out.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Yes. So I want to get started and hop in. You've done so many things and then landed yourself in the space of education. Can you talk to us a little bit about your journey and why you decided to get into the education game?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, like, I didn't choose the game chose me.
Yes.
I was taking a break from hustling. I had a dream. I thought I was gonna just, move to New York and become an actor. Didn't quite work out. And a friend at the time suggested that I come work. I was 19 years old, come work in this after school program. And I fell in love. I was good at it. I had mentors and folks that just kind of supported me, taught me, showed me the game. But also gave me space to innovate and create in a world that really wasn't mine. I wasn't setting out to be an educator, but I cared about young people. And we did some crazy, adventurous, out the box, ask for forgiveness, not permission kind of things in the school building that really worked out. And the fire was lit. I got really excited and I decided to stay in it. And I stayed in it for a long time. And, I went from being kind of a part-time after-school program leader to overseeing multiple to, being the director that oversaw the whole body of work that, I served, and then having the opportunity to kind of really help other people to build the capacity and think about best practices and support young people is kind of what happened, and it happened really fast and it kept happening. And, here we are coming up on 15 years later, I'm still doing it and I still love it. And now at this stage in my life, I get to do it specifically for me. And I say that because, I am a queer Black dad. But I was a little kid once and I was in schools and I did not feel safe. So now I get to take my years of experience, my years of living as me, wrap it all up and bring it to GLSEN. And at GLSEN, we're in the game. We're trying to advance racial, gender, and disability justice outcomes in education just across the board. That's what we do. And I'm really, really excited to be a part of the work.
That's dope. And I think what's important to highlight about your story is a non-traditional path to education. I think a lot of times in spaces and frameworks, we look at education as a technical path, right? Like go to school, you major in education, you get your certification, you get hired. But there are so many young people that we can tap on the shoulder who are working after school programs, who are working in daycares, who are volunteering with young people, who just love to work with young people, that we could tap on the shoulder to recruit to get into this Black educator pipeline. So your story,
for me,
right? It wasn't the traditional way.
No, it's not. And for me, it's the respect of the process, because if I look at my own experience, it helps me better understand the work that I do. So that's why I'm really careful to describe myself as someone who has worked for a long time to improve the cognitive, physical, and social emotional outcomes, because that happened in activities, that happened in
Mhm.
out of school time spaces, that was more centered around the child and not the institution. So obviously in the institution, you want to make sure that, folks respect the craft, and, have the pedagogy and everything that it goes into teaching. But for me, it was always about kind of those outside of the curricular standard outcomes that we're looking at, and watching young people grow into becoming themselves, and figuring out what are the barriers to that, and how can I, with my experience, with my skill, do something to interrupt, intervene, or support them on that journey.
Yes, and I think I love how you said that. Like, it's important to respect the craft, but looking at all the things that make a young person whole and being supportive to that. I just remember in my after school or my out of school time spaces, we talked a lot about youth development, right? Like,
Mhm.
getting a certificate in youth development, like so much about
That's
it.
my jam.
When I moved into a school space, though, there was less conversations about youth development and more of a conversation about growth mindset, but in terms of academic growth. So I just feel like that's so interesting. Again, the differences in spaces and how we choose to treat children or create spaces for them, depending on what institutions that we work for. So,
Oh, absolutely. I worked in schools for 12 years and I've never been a teacher. That's what I tell people all the time. So I don't claim to be, right.
mhm.
I think that we work together. I think that I've had great experiences and had even greater outcomes from that collaborative approach with people who are skilled to do what I'm not, and
Mm.
learn from each other along the way. And I think that it is when we say things real easily, like, it takes a village to raise a child, but a village has a baker, a village has a sheriff, a village has all of these different roles. A village doesn't just have parents, it doesn't just have neighbors, it's
Mm.
everybody. So we can look at our teachers, we can look at our youth development professionals, we can look at the caring adults that happens to know a child's name and pronouns a little bit better than you, and learn from them
Mm.
along the way.
Yes. So talk to us a little bit about what's happening at GLSEN. Why is this organization important and people should learn more about GLSEN?
Yeah, so GLSEN has been in the game since 1990, so a little over 30 years of um, looking at young people, specifically their experiences in schools. So we do a climate survey every year. Every 2 years, we release a report around how young people are experiencing school, like young people that are LGBTQ identified, and how schools are showing up for those young people. So we look at how safe they feel, whether they're avoiding school or not. So we've got like a lot of data over
Mm.
the past 30 that tells us, even down to some of the race and geography things. So we look at the whole country, and we look at kids in schools or young people in schools, and ask questions. We ask educators questions to kind of get a feel on the climate of where schools right now. Are they safe? Are they safer than they were before? Are young people feeling like school is a thing that they can do? Why? Because we know through this research over the many years that young people who are LGBTQ identified are more likely to not graduate from high school,
Mm.
and they are more likely to experience some sort of discrimination or harassment. They're like all of we've heard a lot of these statistics, but what we do is we try to get into figuring out kind of the why, the how, and where these things are happening, so we can talk about it specifically, and then through policy and community networks, try to figure out how to answer some of those things. So we've got a whole research division that looks into kind of asking the questions and learning what's going on and getting a feel of like the climate of schools. And then we've got policy that looks at how safe are students and what do we need to do to defend those safeties or to advocate for like very specific interventions. For young people. And then we have a network of 44 chapters around the country. So you can go on glisten.org and take a look at where your nearest chapter is. And through youth programs and our advocacy days, there are opportunities for folks to get connected. We've got a national student council. We do national campaigns, like right now during Pride. We're sort of partnered with a number of retailers that are in one in particular, our students helped with the design process for their Pride line. So it's like actually done by queer and trans young people. And through that initiative, it's bringing about awareness, and we're also raising money for our national and local works. So that's sort of what GLSEN does. But through all of
doing it, okay.
Yeah, we already do. But what it all comes down to at the end of the day, we've got like some very specific things that we think everybody should have. And we look at all fronts in terms of getting it. So we look at working through schools, we look at working through the legal system, through building community outside of, but that's making sure that young people have access to supportive educators. Those are the people that know who they are and affirm them and support them. That they have access to clubs like GSAs. So we've got the gender sexuality alliances that we support in schools across the country. The next thing is inclusive curricular standards, making sure that folks can see themselves in the books that they read. One of our initiatives that we have is the Rainbow Library that sends books to schools and libraries to make sure that young people can see stories and read about the legends and the icons that have really blazed the path, but also the very normal experiences of, maybe seeing a child that has two dads like them, or a child who has that is trans, you know what I mean? Like being able to see themselves. So that's something that happens when we talk about inclusive curricular standards. And at the end of the day, what's really, really important across the board, that kind of makes a difference on a lot of these things, is inclusive policy. So that's looking at some of the, in my opinion, terrible laws that we have on the books and trying to make sure that we're working against those. But more importantly, in spaces where we can, we're out here, sort of on the offense, if you will, like really fighting to make sure that, nobody's taken away rights. So working with states like in Nevada, passing policy to make sure that folks have access to inclusive curriculum, and testifying on the Title IX hearings, last week. So it kind of all goes together. But those four things is kind of all the data tells us that that's where we've got to drive it home. That's where we can improve some of these outcomes. That's how we can create safer environments, because we know schools around the country are remaining like they're hostile environments for a lot of LGBTQ.
Yeah, that's definitely what I wanted to interject in that. So you guys do so much research, so much partnerships, so much work. Can you share some of the specific findings on some of your school climate reports? And with that, what you guys found, like, would you consider the state of schools, current schools, safe for LGBTQIA youth?
So the benefit of being able to have like this 30-year vantage point is we definitely see where we were. Right. We definitely see how the fight began and how much progress we've made. But in looking forward, in order to have hope, we've got to have a very real understanding of the current reality. And the current reality is we ain't there yet. Right. So like I said, schools today are still a hostile environment, and cause some stress and distress for LGBTQ young people. And just some of the things that we know is that a lot of them routinely hear racist language, anti-LGBTQ language in schools, and the very hearing and seeing of things can create a hostile environment. But to layer onto that a number of students in certain states don't have access to inclusive curriculum. It sort of like what shows up is we know that like in the last climate report, we know that 51% or so of LGBTQ students report feeling unsafe. 42% of them because of their gender expression, and 37% or so because of their gender. 32% of LGBTQ students missed at least one entire day of school. So, if you don't feel safe somewhere, you don't want to go. 8.6% of them missed 4 or more days in the past month. So we're talking almost 10%. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Over 8% missed 4 or more days in school. And everything that we know around learning loss, everything we know around, getting to a point where we can have some fluency, like, you know what I mean? Like, and consistency. And we know that a pandemic, for example, exacerbates any of these issues. If we're already struggling, when something happens externally to everybody, we've got to look at the compounded nature of like oppression and recognize that, you know, it's even worse of an experience for LGBTQ youth. That's just kind of a couple things. Another thing is people talk about reporting about most students reported avoiding like school functions, like 77% of them, and extracurricular activities because they felt unsafe or uncomfortable. And nearly a fifth of LGBTQ students reported having never reported having changed schools due to feeling unsafe or uncomfortable at school. So a fifth of kids have to change schools because the one that they go to doesn't affirm them, doesn't support them, doesn't make sure that they feel safe. So by and large, the state of schools is not great. I think that shout out to educators that show up and form and support clubs like GSAs, or like I said, call kids by their names and, you know, acknowledge their pronouns and things like that, like immediately. I think educators are champions in these spaces because I can't tell you how many schools I've gone to where people have told me that this is their experience. But on the other side of it, through our GSAs and through some of that work, there are young people that are having better experiences. So I won't say that the future is grim because I think that we have an idea of intervention, we have some opportunity, but right now, no, schools are not a safe space. You add to that things like police in school and you know, just a lot of the things that are happening in our world, and add that to just the stuff that we get right out of the climate survey. The answer to that is yes, schools are still hostile for young people that are LGBTQ.
And the reason why I want to stamp that and lift that up, right? A couple things. Listen, got data to back this up, right? So this is not a debate about like an opinion or whether schools are safe for LGBTQIA youth or not. Like, Listen has data to back this up. But another reason why this is super important for us to highlight, because we're talking about kids here. We're talking about young people that we are pouring into, that we as adults are trying to build to be strong citizens and community. And as adults in buildings, we have a responsibility to that. And for sure, without a doubt, we have a responsibility to making sure young people still feel safe. So for me, I like to say always, like, regardless of your own opinion, regardless of how you feel, we are dealing with people's children. We are dealing with children at the heart of all of this. So it's super important to make sure that we are creating safe and inclusive environments for the young people that we're serving. So to hear just statistically,
but I don't want to stop. Let me give you one more thing.
Give it to me.
The next thing that I was going to tell you is in this last report, what we can tell you is like I said, our biggest recommendations are always going to be supportive educators, GSAs, inclusive curricular standards, and inclusive policies. And that's enumerated policies that outline like, no bullying, not just no bullying, but no bullying students because of their gender, sexuality, or gender expression. But in the last report, like I can report that young people have reported that negative school experiences like homophobic remarks, feeling unsafe, and victimization has gone down some.
Shout out.
But school staff intervening in instances of use of biased language has gone up. So educating educators on how to support young people has paid off. Positive educational outcomes, that means less missed school, greater educational aspirations, and higher GPA, that's trending up. Are we high? We're not there yet. Like, there's still work to do, but what we're seeing is a return on that investment. It's our investment, our intervention makes sense, and we're going to double down on it. We're going to keep working to advance racial, gender, and disability justice outcomes in education because it works.
Let's listen. And again, that's a testament, like you said, to the work that you guys do, getting out there, educating people, and partnering with schools. Because a lot of times I feel like just sometimes in these spaces, people are just ignorant to the fact, right? Like, just don't have a clue where to start, where to go, or just uneducated on issues that affect LGBTQ youth. So we appreciate organizations like GLSEN that is actually out there doing the work and willing to partner with people. But also raising up that organizations need to be willing to partner and open to education and professional development so that they can make sure all young people in their building are safe. But something I want to hint to too is the importance of identity in school and how that all fits together. I just think that sometimes we don't think as a school as a place where folks build their identity. We don't explicitly talk about that. We talk about school as a building where folks are coming to get academic support, knowledge and learning, preparation for your future career or go to college. But we don't talk about school as a place where young people are actually discovering who they are, or not only discovering who they are, finding support, and basically permission to be themselves in the space, because that's where they spend 7 to 8 hours out of their day. Why is it important for educators to own that schools are an important place in shaping who young people become beyond the classroom?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I think that for me, when I picture youth development, because I told I'm a youth development kind of guy, I picture the whole continuum. And there's a diagram that we used to use in my work. But when you look at the whole continuum, there exists like milestones and markers, right? And
Mm-hmm.
typically, when we're looking at an outcome such as third grade reading, we try to apply some sort of intervention to guarantee that, because we believe that young people should be on track by third grade reading, we're going to have, I don't know, a third grade reading guarantee in Ohio. And we're going to double down all of our efforts to support that everybody reads by third grade. When we talk about physical development of young people, you don't see kindergarten, like preschool furniture in a high school, because high schoolers would sit down and break it. We have that complete understanding that
Mm-hmm.
that development happened. And I think I shout out to all of the folks that are leaning in and doing the work around social emotional learning and making sure that we have social emotional learning curriculum in schools. But part of social emotional learning and development includes that forming of an identity that a young person has. And that is directly correlated to how safe they feel in a space, how much they can lean in and be themselves or show up as their true selves, or if there's fear around that. So I think that the importance of it is to recognize, like everything else, like third grade reading or the size of furniture and the physical development of young people, this thing is happening. It's happening. It exists. Someone's sexual orientation, someone's gender is most core to their identity and their personality, and it is constantly growing in development. How amazing would it be if we considered what those markers were, what those
Mm-hmm.
indicators are for success, or perhaps a need for intervention to support? Because I think we've done that the wrong way for a long time. I always say, when I was in kindergarten, I wanted an easy bake oven, and I can't tell you how many people told me that was wrong, and they intervened to make sure that I was on track
That you
to
wouldn't.
express my gender by playing sports. And I've never been athletic. I
Mm.
think that the same way, what that was an understanding of my development and an intervention that was, in my opinion, inappropriate. Like, you know what I mean? Because all the
Yes.
knowledge wasn't there. So how amazing would it be if educators who understood child development, who understood gender and sexuality expression and identity, to support a child in that sort of space. We're in 2021, and I think that it's just, we're doing some refresh, right? I think that we've
Yep.
got great intentions. Sometimes we don't have all the tools. So it's important to understand that it's happening anyway. And the same way that we've adapted our curriculum, our practice, and our policies to allow for growth and transition in all of these other areas, it's time that, as we're looking at social emotional learning and development, that we consider what that means in terms of providing and creating safe spaces for young people in terms of their gender, sexuality, or gender expression.
I think that that is super dope and super amazing that you lift that up in that way, especially the comment, it's happening, right? I think that sometimes we feel like if we don't highlight things, if we don't lift them up, they'll disappear. But a young person is developing into who
Yo,
they
I'm
are.
gonna tell you, I've got a daughter. I gotta say it right. She'll be 6. If I say she's 5, she'll tell me I'm almost 6. I respect that. She identifies as almost 6. It's not my business. So my daughter is almost 6, and there's not a day that goes by where I don't look at her like, your face changed, or like,
Mm-hmm.
when did you, this baby that I held that needed me for everything, have an opinion? When did you have preferences? Like, it
Yes.
baffles me. But what I have to recognize is my discomfort is my adultism. My discomfort is the fact that I see this little baby is this thing that I own and control, and I have to check that, right? What am
Yes.
I doing to make sure that those feelings, it's amazing that she has these opinions and these preferences and these things, even the way she identifies in terms of communicating about her age, like even that, giving her space to be, I think is sort of what I'm learning that we need to do in our work as well. It's just taking a step back and recognize what's already happening and figuring out how do we adjust to that, or like have our current practices aligned with the reality. And if not, what are some that are out there, right? What are some supports that exist? GLSEN has tons of resources on our website around like supporting educators and creating safe spaces and things like that. So I want to lift that up. Like you can go there, but for me, what it comes down to is the same way with my child, is letting her grow and making sure that what I do supports that growth and doesn't stop it, even when I'm uncomfortable.
Yes. And what are some ways that educators can support students' identity development in school or in the classroom?
So if you, again, my experience has been in the out of school time space. And I know like the Weicker Center for Youth Program Quality has a tons of research and materials in terms of safe and supportive environments. But like when we look at how those things exist, sort of like a pyramid, like when you think of like the hierarchy of needs and all of those things, and core most of that are, you know, a sense of belonging and the sense of identity. Like, you know what I mean? Knowing that who you are is okay, who you are is who you are, and then who you are is okay, like separate of that, and like making sure that everything that we do. So the moment that a child introduces themselves to you, the name that they give you, the pronouns that they give you, I think that that is low hanging fruit, right? That's without having to sit through, like, because I'm not saying everybody knows everything and everybody's just up to date on all of the terminology or, you know, all of the best practices, or even that, you know, you've seen it before. That,
Mm-hmm.
like, let's get past the shock. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Because
at this
if we
point.
lean into the shock, we realize we're not really shocked. We're just talking about it for the first time. So when we look at that, like, what are we doing to support that basic, that core bottom level of that pyramid and managing our interactions? I love, there was a thing that I saw the other day um, where like Tabitha Brown always says in her videos, if you've ever watched them, she always says,
That's my
you
girl.
have a good day. And if you're not gonna have a good day, make sure you don't go ruining nobody else's. So
Nobody
like
else did.
adopting that idea, and when we encounter young people, that we're not ruining their day or ruining their experience or ruining their access to high quality learning
Yes.
through what turn out to be really arbitrary disruptions, right? Like my opinion on your gender expression, or my
My own
feelings
convictions.
about, or my own convictions, like whatever that is, like that's yours to have. I would hope that your heart change. I don't do like heart and mind work. Like I hope that that happens, but the reality is, like when you signed up to do this work, it was for all. It was whoever came into your classroom, whoever
Yep.
came into your program. And if there are things that exist as barriers between you and providing high quality loving on babies, check that for yourself, right? Start with, so I tell people all the time, the first thing you can do is love on the queer and trans kids that are in your life and talk to your homophobic parents. Like, because I think a lot of times we want to do like this big work of changing either schools or networks. It's in our sphere of influence first, starting at home and looking at the end of every day, the young people that I came in contact with, did I make sure that I affirmed them? So when we talk about pronouns, especially, I usually introduce myself and I say, hi, my name is Jamond. My pronouns are he, him, his. And I can't tell you how many times people have like asked me why I do that, or said, well, if my pronouns aren't different, then why, you know, should I? And the
Mm.
reality is, you don't know my pronouns until I tell you. It's not that we're trying to be politically correct or try to inconvenience anybody. It's the reality that unless I tell you my gender, you don't
You
know.
don't
So
know it.
who wants to be the person who, like, okay, everybody else's gender um, is assumed and not corrected? Like, how inconvenient is it? You know what I mean? There's pressure immediately on the person who has to be the one person to correct. So on the first day of school, it doesn't hurt. doesn't hurt anybody to lead with an exercise that starts off letting people tell you who they are. I think that we do that, right? We know that that's
Yeah,
what works. And that's why on the first day of school, K through 12, we play every version of the name game there is. I'm saying let's play the name game
that is the
and let's
icebreaker.
use names that people tell us they want to use, and let's add the pronouns to it because we can't assume it. And I think that that immediately um, offers a sense of safety that doesn't exist when we either erase or force people into doing something different than their actual identity. So to start, like, look at what you're already doing and figure out how to lift up the experiences that are outside of your own, and that actually support and provide a safe environment that's supportive for young people that are queer, trans identified.
And I think the beauty in what you said is I need to take myself out of it, right? I need to take my uncomfortability, my feelings. Like, it's not for me, right? So even if my assumed pronouns, right, what people assume me to be is what I am, I'm not doing that to, I guess how you say, to confirm your assumption. I'm doing it to make it a comfortable space for other people that we have assumptions about to tell us who they are, so we don't assume, so that we
Yeah,
know.
the first time my daughter met, I won't say it's the first time she met, but she's a little older now. So like this was the first time that she, in her new, more developed kindergarten brain,
Yes.
uh, encountered someone who used they them pronouns, and she just got outraged, and she's asking me, why are you saying they, it's she? And I was like, no,
Mm.
they use they them pronouns, but she's a girl, they are not a girl. And I literally took that moment, and then we I said, do you know what pronouns are? And she's like, well, no. So I explained that, what pronouns are and how they use. And she then said, well, what are your pronouns? So I told her what my pronouns were. Um, and I said, well, what are your pronouns? And she was like, well, I usually use she and her, but there's they, them, and there's he and she. I like she and her. And I said, okay, let me know if something changes. And just that quick, I was able to affirm her gender identity in a way that made sense for her, but also helped her understand how to interact with other people. I saw pop up in the comments a minute ago, like, uh, pronouns in an email signature. It's not a trend. It's not a thing that some people should do and some people shouldn't do. It really just is a way to introduce yourself.
Mhm.
And so when kids come in or young people come into your programs, where you go like, hey, boys and girls,
Mm.
I know that it's our language. I know that it's what we normally do, but hey, everybody, what's up, folks? Hey, y'all. You know what I mean? There are other words that we use. Nobody's like, it's not inconvenient, it's intentional.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that there requires a level of care and intention when working with young people. Like, it's when you think of it as a developmental process, again, it's growing, it's molding, it's shaping. If you've ever baked anything, cooked anything, or whatever, first of all, you want to make sure that all the ingredients are inside the cake. You
Right.
can't like smear the egg on top of it when it's done. So like, first of all, you want to make sure everything's in a cake, but also you want to make sure that it's in a pan in which it can grow and it can shape the way that you want it. You're not going to bake a cupcake in a casserole pan. Like, you know what I mean? You
Right.
want it in the right place. You want the container to be able to support it and to hold it. And then you can put the frosting and the sprinkles on top. But like most of it is baked into the cake and making sure that the container can hold it. So what's in your cake? Like, you know what I mean? Are you intentional? Like, you can't come after the fact and tell somebody, well, you should know I love you, or I love all my students. That's when we're trying to apply like equity as sprinkles, and it doesn't work that way. Like, it's
No,
got to be baked into the
it's the
cake.
cake. You have to do the work. You have to show. You have to intentionally create supportive and safe environments. And you highlight language as a very important tool to do that. So even how we are greeting, how we are speaking, and fighting the need that we have sometimes to put labels and boxes on people that we want to have on people,
Yeah.
right? The important thing to take away from this is that young people get to choose who they are and who they want to be, and it's our job to support that.
Mhm.
Um, and when
And then how
things,
do we support it? That's when we can
Yes.
talk about making sure that we have resources in the classroom where young people can see themselves. That's where we talk about having clubs or spaces and opportunities for them to be with people that understand, or people who relate, or people that explicitly, support and show up as allies for them. That's where you can identify yourself as a supportive educator. I'm not saying that you have to, if you're a queer person, come out to everybody, but I'm saying that if you position yourself as someone who is safe, when someone's in danger, they might come to you.
Yes. And they need that though. They need those outlets. And I think that sometimes folks are forced to come out before they would have to like to. And I always give the example of, right, like being a straight person, not coming out, right, just out, because we live in a heteronormative society. But being queer, when it's not the regular norm for people to not genderize your partner based on your assumed identity and all these other things that happen. Just imagine a world where that's happening to young people. And when we connect identities back to school, especially when you're thinking about, I mean, it happens early on, right? With girls and boys and bathrooms and groupings, like all of that happens in very early stages. But when you think about, wait, what you about to say?
Sometimes when I tell my story about my journey, I say I started my career in an after school program with a group of third and fourth grade boys back when I thought it was best to separate kids by gender.
Right. So
And
then
you know what I mean? That is an
yeah.
understanding that, I did not have then. And the people who are overseeing the program didn't have then. I'm not saying that it was a terrible place to be. I'm saying I now know a better way to keep young people safe. And that's what I do now. I do it differently.
Well, education, right? Because you educate yourselves. I worked in a school where we did have SEL, but part of the SEL curriculum was to separate young people by gender. And it wasn't until we began to educate ourselves, and the young people will force you to do that, right? As you're saying, like, identity is happening whether you like it or not. So when we have young people who weren't identifying as either gender, who either identified as non-binary or they identified as trans, that leaves you in a state of like, okay, now what? You
Yeah.
can't force
So,
people to be in a box that you pick for them. That's not how it works.
yeah, we're still in a space where most LGBTQ students have reported personally experiencing LGBTQ related discriminatory practice or practices at school. Specifically, LGBTQ students reported being prevented from using certain bathrooms, disciplined for public displays of affection, prevented from from attending dances or functions with someone of the same gender, prevented or discouraged for participating in school sports because they were LGBTQ. Like, you know what I mean? This is still happening. It's not just a matter of like what I would prefer or even what I think is best practices in this situation. This is me talking about our climate report, our climate survey report that tells us that there are young people in 2021 telling you that they feel discriminated and excluded from practices and programs and activities that are core to, like, you know what I mean? The social, like, part of high school is the events, is the sports, is the dances and all of those things. And I remember I almost didn't go to prom, same reasons, you know what I mean? I just didn't feel great. And a family friend, like, literally picked me up from school, took me to a tuxedo shop, like, made it happen so I can go to prom. And I had to go. And I ended up having a good time later. But I think about, and I always say, like, I'm so glad that I went to prom. But what I never really got to dig into, and I never really got to process, was why I didn't want to go in the first place. And now that I'm in the work, I'm looking at it like, wow, that's still a thing. And it's been
Yes.
a while since I was in high school, but also, like, not many of them would have ended up having a good time like I had. Like, it really, for some of them, would have been unsafe. But now what we're looking at, even young people with each other, like, some of the data, like, really shows, like, there's a lot of hearing some of the comments that people used to make in a bad way, they're not making anymore, they're making different. So in terms of language peer to peer, it's gotten a little better and a little different. um but we're still working on systems and adults to move in support of those things. And like when we talk about discriminatory school practices and policies, it's real dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And especially because those school policies aren't just school policies. We're talking the local level, the state level. Thank goodness for some change, like Title IX, and to make sure that we're including trans students in, some of the basic protections that exist in schools now. But just all the way up and down the political ladder, there are like sometimes threats, and there's sometimes dangers to some of these things. But the experience, one is too many, but we're talking about more than half of them feeling some form of this.
Yeah, and again, I want to highlight and go back to, at the heart of this, we're talking about children. And for somebody to be excluded from prom or sports, all the things that make basically, right, your social kind of connections in high school, for somebody to be excluded from that. Imagine if that was you. Imagine if that was your child. So all of those things I feel like are super important for us to focus on. I don't know, folks, looks like we lost Jamond out here. So hopefully he'll be back. But Cynthia, I want to agree with you and say, like, sometimes it can be embarrassing. And one of the things I learned from our show definitely last week was it's about practice, because these things are new to us. So it's about practice. So some of the things that Germaine pointed out in terms of leading with your pronouns, respecting and recognizing people's pronouns. And the more we do it, the more we normalize it, the more practice we'll have at it. And I think that that's super important. I feel embarrassed when I misgender people all the time. People show me grace because they know that it's not intentional disrespect. But there are some people who intentionally refuse to use people pronouns because they're like, oh, that's crazy, I ain't doing that. Where, how are you not going to respect or affirm another person as a human being? And then once again, when you boil this down to children and creating safe spaces for young people, like, what's your hang up in doing that? Why would it hurt you to affirm a young person who's trying to be literally just being them, not trying to be anything else other than be themselves, which is why this is so important. And Jamond, I would love for you to explain this to people, because I think this is so important too for them to understand when we're talking about young people. Why is it so important for people to understand the difference between gender and sexual orientation, but affirm them for both for young people?
I think that it's important because they aren't the same thing. And I know that that sounds like a really simple answer, and I'm not being like coy, like I'm not being a jerk. I'm
No.
saying that for a long time we've informed our understanding of people based on our very flat and limited understandings of gender and sexuality as separate things. You can't assume anything about me in terms of my sexuality because of my gender, and you can't assume anything about my gender in terms of my sexuality. They really just are separate things. And the reason why it's important to affirm someone for both is because those are very specific and integral parts of our core identity, and even make up like personality, the core of us. So you can't talk about not seeing someone's gender, not seeing someone's color, not seeing someone's sexual orientation, and call yourself a friend or call yourself a community member or really someone's educator. You've got to see me in order to help me. You've got to know me to teach me. I think that when we do the work, all of the data, all the research for years and years tells us around relationship building with students, and what's the old proverb? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Like that's the way that we've been taught to teach and to work. It applies here. It really, really does.
Yes.
I have any sentient creature or being knows if you want to be around them or not. Like my dog doesn't bother me when I'm in a bad mood. My daughter treads lightly if she knows she's in trouble. But when I am happy and I'm exciting, my daughter wants to be close to me. And it's not necessarily about my personality, but if you feel like someone gets you, someone loves you, someone cares about you, you're open to hearing what more they have to say. So if we're in situations where, because of a hostile environment, a young person doesn't feel like coming to school, when they do come to school, it helps if there's somebody there waiting for them that knows them by their name, that affirms the whole of who they are.
Yes, and you make the whole of who they are. And I think what we're definitely learning from this conversation is that we have to stop making assumptions, and we have to stop being upset when people don't live up to our expectations or what we feel our expectations of young people should be, right? They don't fit into the neat box that we would like them to fit in. And I think that that's super important. And I think that it's important to know and understand what a person's gender is so you don't misgender, or again, we don't create these environments that are just of the binary. So I think that's super important. But understand that though we are affirming people's sexual orientation, it's none of your business. And I always want to say that to people because I think people get super curious because, again, if you're not of the heteronormative, you got all these questions. At the end of the day, we have to allow, and I learned this from Chloe last week, we have to allow people to share as much as that they would like. But we have to be really intentional about creating those kind of environments where people feel safe to be and explain who they are, but at the same time, be able to share with us as much as they would like. And I think that is super important for us to talk about.
So I feel
Also,
like in that situation, I think that it's important that I say this, like young people are absolutely entitled to educators, particularly public educators who are like paid for by tax dollars to show up and support them a certain way. That is an entitlement, in my opinion. You, as a person interacting with a queer trans person, have no entitlement to knowing anything about what they do in their personal life. I think that what is important that you know is my name, what to call me, and
how you can support me.
And how you can support me, and like what especially as that relates to the education space, like where my ambitions are, what I'm looking to learn from you. We can build community, we can build relationship, but like this weird obsession with what people are doing with the people that they love or hook up with is just I don't completely understand it, but I will say that it is entirely rooted in the homophobic and heteronormative idea that to be heterosexual means that there is some level of power that you have and that people have to report up to you, what private parts they have or what they do on their weekends. They don't, even if they're children. And I think that freeing ourselves from the expectation of very, very personal knowledge, like I feel like, you know, when people ask me personal questions, I just go, yeah, how's your sex life? And they're like, huh? Yeah, that was inappropriate, wasn't it?
Super inappropriate. And
That's exactly what you just did to me.
The reason why I lift this up, because again, young people going through their own transitional stuff, going through, if you are a person who identifies as straight, so to speak, in this country, going through puberty and everything else is confusing enough. But imagine being a part of a marginalized group, and you have these people asking you all these questions, and you're already fighting against an oppressive system. It's not our job to make these situations more uncomfortable for young people. You know, this show, we're dedicated to building the Black educator pipeline. But one of the things I know that you are, because GLSEN has the research, you do the research, you've lived it, right? Can we dispel this myth that the Black community is homophobic or more homophobic than any other community? Like, can you help us cut that so people understand like it's not a thing? Because it's so pervasive.
What happens is I think people take like a complicated truth and just try to make it really simple. The complicated truth is that we live in a racist, homophobic society. I don't have the expectation that, you know, an extremely oppressed group has the ability to like completely rise above in another area, like better than anybody else. Like, you know what I mean? That the pressure that Black people are going to be like, should be champions because we know the struggle is like on the conversation that you hear on one end. And on the other end, it's like, oh, I came out as gay. That must be hard, you know, you being Black and all. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the reality is, what we know is in this country, because it's racist and homophobic, we're going to counter racism and homophobia. And if you have and live at like if you live at any of these intersections, it becomes more complicated,
Yeah.
because when we talk about dismantling systems, it doesn't help me that entirely. So like, yeah, I can so marry a partner with the same gender as me now, but racism, right, is still at play.
Still
So
here.
I'm not now free. So when we talk about liberation from an intersectional lens, we've got to understand all of it. And I think that sometimes just the blanket Black people are more homophobic, or it's harder to be Black and gay erases the fact that there are just many, many queer and trans Black people. uh, Even when we talk about that in relation to the Black church, there are faith leaders who are LGBTQ identified and or open, and affirming, and supportive. So I think that when people want to have just the blanket Black people are more homophobic conversation, it becomes complicated because there's like a responsibility that you're putting there that negates the fact that we're existing in a completely racist, homophobic society, and that it's going to be work across the board to make it better. But I feel that like when we talk about working with our students and our educators, I think that we can target our intervention to support and understand the experience of people who are coming up and through this complicated, difficult system without making it seem like it's more difficult or impossible because of their Blackness.
Yes, and I think you bring a great point when you bring up intersectionality. And I think that that's super important for us to understand and lift up when we're talking about Black, queer, gay folks because of the intersectionality of racism and homophobia and living and existing in this society. But like last week when I was talking to Raymond Fields and Chloe Mann, them talking about their community embracing them and a community of families and children that they serve, because I think that again we create this idea which makes people very reluctant to like come out and live and be themselves, and I think that there is a narrative creative that it's harder to do that within the Black community, whereas I would say not that it's harder to do that in the Black community, it's harder to do that with intersectionality, with being Black, being queer, being trans. That's what makes it hard,
Particularly
that couple
when a
being Black.
movement, there's been a whole movement for like LGBTQ rights that has largely not censored and in many cases erased the experience of Black people along the way. Like, I mean, we've seen the movies, we hear the stories made famous, and not so often, or up until recently, even with media portrayals, like, you know what I mean, we don't see a lot of the experience that happened, and it allows people to believe the idea that this is a new experience for Black people. And I don't want to go down that wormhole with, you know, how long we've existed and like how long people have been gay, like, you know, it's a thing.
Right.
But I think that it's important to lift up that at this, like, this too is at this, like, that's where the intersections of like the systems get to be an issue, because when you look at the gay liberation movement, or like the movement for LGBTQ rights, historically, having not censored Black people, it becomes really, really easy to make this. That's the thing that those. I mean, I've heard people tell me like, "Oh, that's for white people," or, and that's not real. That's never been what we've experienced. But our ability to tell our stories, and that's why it's important to understand intersectionality, because if you understand intersectionality, you first understand that you got to look at the whole picture, but then secondly, you understand how power plays in and who has power and where they have that power, and you get really a little bit more careful around what you expect, understand, and where you place blame.
Yes. And I think that that's the point to highlight when we have these conversations, doing your research and definitely understanding intersectionality and how that all plays a major part in this. Before we close out, I would like to talk about, if we want to be a true partner in this work, if you're an educator out there and you really want to be a true partner and you want to show up for your kids and create a safe environment, how should we be showing up?
I think we talked about that a little bit earlier. When I say start at home, and the folks that see you, when they see you, do they know that you're a safe space? Why or why not? I think that we do really, really good at pointing out, the terrible things that show up. But I can't tell you how many educators I know personally that have like saved actual lives, or
Mm,
who have been safe spaces, who have been parents, you know what I mean, to young
yes.
people who are really, really doing the work. So I'll say, you know, if you don't already know that you are a safe, supportive adult in the lives of your students, really sit with that and figure out how you can best show up. If you know that you are and you feel like you want to do more, like I said, what we always recommend, like having GSAs in schools goes so far. Perhaps you want to do that. We have our chapter network. So if you are in a city that has a chapter, get involved, work with young people that are in your city that need support. So we've got youth groups, we've got programming and things like that. And it's not just a GLSEN thing. I'm saying, like, find your youth serving LGBTQ organization in your area, see how to get plugged in. If it doesn't exist, you can call us. You can always start a chapter. I'm actually the person that you call for that. GLSEN.org, and submit an inquiry. We can talk about starting a chapter. But most importantly, just in the day-to-day interactions with young people, call them by their names, use their pronouns, make sure that you let them know that you're happy to see them. Remember the things that they told you about their lives as though that they're important to you. All the things that make you feel warm and fuzzy when your friends and your family and community members remember, and they connect, and they, celebrate the joys in your life. I'm asking you to do what you said you were always doing. I'm asking
Mhm.
you to look at your students, your community, your city, and take a hard ask at how you're showing up. If not, and at the end of the day, what you want is, you want to make sure that you are adding to and not taking away, that someone feels safer and not more afraid. Those little interactions are life-saving. But ultimately, there are some things up the flagpole. Like I said, there's starting groups and chapters, there's policy work. When you hear of a bill that needs to be started or stopped in
Mhm.
your state or local, like, legislature, or even federally, sign on to a statement or call your representative. And we have, like, we have policy maps on our website, and there's a lot of there's a postcard that we send out that kind of gives us kind of the state of what's happening by state, and what's happening there. So having a good understanding of what threats exist to young people, and how we can work to make sure that they can have access to those safe, supportive environments, those GSAs, those inclusive curriculums, and the enumerated policies in terms of no bullying. So the up and down, just figuring out where you have impact, where you have connection, and working those things. But at the end of the day, every young person that you interact with, make sure that they feel the way you intend on them feeling. Make sure that their lives are better as a result of your work, and make sure that people know that you are safe in a space that is hostile.
That's amazing. Jamal, thank you for being definitely a breath of fresh air, a beam of light, especially for the LGBTQIA families. And thank you at GLSEN for leading and teaching and showing the way about how to really support the whole child. Because at the end of the day, yes, we are talking specifically about LGBTQI folks, but it's really about supporting the whole child and making sure that all children have a safe space to be educated, to be loved up on, and to find comfort and security. I'm in a place where we say they should be feeling safe. So we appreciate
Mhm.
you for that. We are about to wrap up. Do you have any final parting words for the people out there?
I just want to say thank you, because the work that you do, I believe to be sacred and amazing, and you do such an amazing job at it. Thank you for everyone who listened, and please figure out how to love on a child today. And if you don't know how, go to glisten.org and connect with me, and we will figure out what we can do from there.
Well, thank you, everybody, as always, for coming back every week to support Building the Black Educator Pipeline. I'm your host, Shana Terrell. I appreciate the love and the support for listening today. Again, happy Pride Month. Be out there celebrating and lifting up the voices and our people in our LGBTQI families in space. So thank you, everybody, for watching. See you next